Hey everyone, my name is Justin Woodring, and this is Computing Science with Justin Woodring. Today I wanted to talk about what it means to be a senior programmer. Um, I think a lot of people have serious misconceptions about what being a senior programmer even means, or, the distinction between a junior or senior programmer, developer, or anything of that sense. Um, and at the end of the day, there are several important distinctions that obviously qualify a senior for getting paid more. So typically, someone coming out of college is going to be thinking with the mindset, well, why is it 3 to 6 years before I could become a senior? What does it mean? And honestly, 3 years is usually on the short end. But how can I, for example, maybe I landed a job at a company, or how can I exhibit qualities that are going to, allow me to be considered for, um, you know, senior level work or promotion, what have you. Um, and I think, this was prompted to some extent by some, various like posts and stuff I saw online that were, I think, very misleading about what it means at all. And at the end of the day, a senior obviously implies age. Um, and if we try to, work this out, I guess, to some extent, you might say, oh, well, what comes with age? And obviously some people be like, oh, wisdom, whatever. But really what comes with age is more or less going to be the kind of clarity about what things matter, ideally, and what things don't. Um, and in a professional sense, this means that, for example, you might start to prioritize yours or others' time over things that seem novel. Typically, juniors, they're very ambitious. They're, ready to jump in on any new project. They love greenfield projects. Um, because it's like, oh, I can try out this new technology and this cool thing that's experimental, and there's a lot of reinventing the wheel goes on. Learning these new technologies, it's insane trying to keep up with all of them. And to be honest, for an organization, it's not a terribly great thing to try to keep up with the rapid proliferation of things like JavaScript frameworks. So you really need a bit of that age and seniority in order to make the call about whether whether a technology is worth diving into, I guess. And what I mean is not that, you should have a dinosaur tech stack, but that just because you found out that, Zig is cool and it has some like, type safety or something. I don't know a lot about Zig, so don't like sue me or whatever. But the point is that it doesn't mean you should go rewriting the entire company's infrastructure in Zig. Um, it would probably be it'd make a lot more sense to do something like, .NET. Um, if you look at the number of .NET developers versus Zig developers, it's going to be a lot easier for the company to find a replacement or bring on, new juniors or whatever, if they need a new developer. Things happen to people, even in the less, morbid sense. You can't guarantee that you're going to be there to maintain the infrastructure, um, that the company that you may have even put in place for a company. So design that. You should design, your documentation and infrastructure with that in mind. It should be a system that can be allow you to be replaced. And you might be thinking, oh well, maybe this is engineering my own removal from the company. And the truth be told, no, most companies they really like it when you don't do that. Because and what I mean I don't do that is companies hate it. They don't. They will actively try to remove people who try to engineer themselves into the company permanently. Wizards, I guess is what they typically would call those types of people. The types of people who understand some like have some arcane understanding of a various technology in the company. In fact, you'll probably be the most valuable to a company if you're consistently engineering the infrastructure and systems for the company with the company in mind. Because that's really what being a team player, I guess, is all about. Um, so more or less, the senior thinking again is typically the things that come with seniority is mentorship. You're gonna be bringing juniors and others up to speed on the actual internal practices of a company. But when you're not concerned with the internal, like business value of whatever you're accomplishing, um, the other important aspect is what we've been talking about already, which is kind of like this rapidity of change. You should, it's about making the decisions that ensure the posterity and longevity of whatever work you're doing. If, and to give an example, I might say, like, oh, well, okay, I designed an application in, you know, whatever, like Java 8 or 11. Obviously, Java 8's finally basically kicked the bucket. But let's say that you wrote an application in Java 11. Well, Java 11 came out a long time ago, and last I checked, it's still supported. At least, long-term support. It might be kind of getting towards phased out. But the point is that, it came out probably like, I think it was somewhere around like 15 years ago. And if conversely, if you had, chosen to do a project in something like, Rust, which came out in like 2008 or something like that. I'm not saying Rust is a bad language because I like Rust. I think it's a good language to use for certain projects these days. But back when it came out, it was not mature in any sense. And frankly, no one knew whether it was going to last. There's lots of languages that come and go every day. It doesn't make them a good choice for implementing in a company's core infrastructure, especially when you don't have people who are brought up to speed on how that infrastructure tooling or language works. Um, there's plenty of resources on .NET. Problems that get encountered in .NET get encountered regularly, and usually they're the same kinds of problems, which means that if it's been done once, it probably has been fixed once, and generally there's more resources available how to solve these problems. So it's about, in a company sense, collectively pooling towards the correct answer, or the correct solution to common problems. Um, and that means that the expertise, even for people who are working outside the company, is still going to be valuable to people inside the company just because they all work on .NET or whatever tool they respectively use. Um, I mean, in the same sense, you could say that is why Python has rapidly proliferated across the industries that it has. It's just because it's so easy to use that everybody uses it, and then common problems get solved in Python that aren't solved in other languages. And regardless of how you feel about Python, it's one of the easier things to use now because there's just so many libraries to do everything. Um, so, in that sense, that's what being a senior is about. It's about making these decisions, not the cool decisions, not the fun decisions, but the mature, stable decisions. Typically you're going to not, look at the new features of a system first. You're going to look at what's the long-term support for this look like. Does it do what the current system already can do? Um, those types of questions. And then finally, if you are looking at replacing a system, it's about evaluating the next stable, mature thing, still not the bleeding edge new cool thing. And finally, it's about moving away from smart code. Uh, and what I mean by that is like we're we're developers and programmers, and we all think, oh well, that's like you'll have like I guess kind of like a genius moment, and you're like, okay, you're up at 3 in the morning, whatever, programming a project, and you're like, oh, that's brilliant. I'm gonna like put this thing in here, and it's gonna do all the cool things, and then you come back a week later and you can't explain how it worked. And even if you put documentation in there, like comments and stuff like that, it still takes a while to comprehend. The reality is you don't want that kind of code in your infrastructure if you don't need it. Um, Obviously, if you're just getting a massive performance enhancement, you know, um, sure, but most of the time, you don't need that kind of code, and it's usually just over engineering. And the fact is that everything you over engineer that deviates from standard design patterns and principles is only going to increase the amount of time it takes to go back and solve a problem later, to go add or extend functionality. So, if you do work in something like .NET and, you use like mediators and stuff like that. That's fine because mediator is a common pattern. But if you decide to like invent your own mediator that extends some library internally and does some weird cool logic and stuff like that, now that's not something anyone else has ever worked with. So you've introduced your own set of problems. You have all of this overhead that you have to maintain, or at least someone in the company has to maintain. And then you also need to teach everyone else about this specifically because they couldn't have seen it anywhere else. It's not like a common mediator pattern. It's your custom implementation that does weird, cool things. Um, and this is serious baggage for, especially even if you understand it greatly, as soon as you leave, someone else is going to have to be trained or have to basically piecemeal your project together just to figure out how a tool that should otherwise be implemented using standard practices is designed. Um, so I think to juniors, seniors are going to appear like sticks in the mud a lot because it's like, oh, well, we found this cool thing. It solves all the world's problems. And the reality is that the world had roughly the same problems that it had yesterday, today, and that there were already solutions for today's problem yesterday, even if they aren't as cool. Um, and that rarely there's such a amazing industry change that completely just necessitates the need to replace an existing tool with a new tool. I think probably one of those was like single page applications, the APIs. We went from, um, server side, like kind of like PHP or maybe like the old ASP MVC pages to, these more like API um, and like single page application React type pages. And I think that was a significant change in the industry that really dictated, oh, well, it's time to actually look at the benefits that this can bring us. And it came with pitfalls too. So there wasn't necessarily a reason for every company to switch over right away. Some still haven't, and they don't need to. Um, Certainly not anytime soon or possibly ever. Um, and again, that decision at the end of the day is kind of like a managerial and senior decision to make. It's usually not a junior decision, because it has complexity and long-term associated costs that a junior can't really comprehend because they generally speaking have not been around long enough to have to maintain that kind of aging infrastructure. Um, so again, senior position takes usually a few years to be qualified for, but we can exhibit these kind of patterns of thinking long before we get there and be recognized for I guess team playing, mentorship, mature sound reasoning. A final aspect of being a senior is really just being able to communicate. Um, you know, and I don't mean communicate excitement, but breaking down advanced technical concepts to one, the people you're mentoring, and two, other people in a company who bring value. So, product owners, you know, clients themselves, users. Depending on what your role is in the company, you may be asked to provide, valuable technical expertise or be in calls where, the company is possibly, negotiating contracts and things like that. And so it's about bringing that professional presence to where you can answer those technical questions and you know which ones to answer, and which ones to, I guess, kind of like, um, which ones to kind of like, confer with other entities inside your company first before answering. So ideally, it's someone the company wants to be able to put you in front of a client and you don't mess everything up, or, talk about like, oh, well, here's all the problems with their application. Or maybe they do want you to talk about that. Who knows? Whatever is going to, whatever the company in particular wants to in order to basically accomplish the greater business goals of the company. Um, so it's really less about thinking about your day to day and more about thinking about how the decisions you're making are going to impact the day to day of other people in the company, including those under you and then those who, work in divisions and whatnot around you. Um, and I think that kind of wraps up probably, the biggest insights I have about what it means to be a senior developer. Um, I know this format's probably a little bit different than what I usually do, which is more or less instructional kind of content. But I thought that thought this would be interesting to talk about. So, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, definitely, um, you know, leave a comment or a like or share it with somebody who you think would find this interesting. And of course, if you want to see more of this kind of content, let me know. Until next time.